When Jaguar Wright first reacted to the new Diddy documentary, she didn't sound surprised. In fact, she made it clear that almost everything being discussed had been circulating behind closed doors for years. To her, the documentary wasn't uncovering some brand new truth, but rather repackaging stories she had already heard, seen, or quietly watched unfold from the sidelines. But then, something happened that made her pause. One moment stood out, not because it was dramatic or heavily produced, but because of who finally said something out loud. Toward the end of episode 4, a longtime insider made a statement that instantly changed the weight of the entire documentary. For the first time, Kirk Burroughs publicly claimed that he had been abused by Diddy. This wasn't a rumor, it wasn't a blog post, it wasn't speculation. It was a direct allegation from someone who had been there since the very beginning. Jaguar made it clear that even for people who thought they knew everything about Diddy, this was different. This was the kind of admission that forces people to reassess everything they thought they understood about power, silence, and what really happens behind the scenes in the music industry. And once that door opened, it became impossible to ignore how long this story had been waiting to be told. Kirk Burroughs isn't some distant figure who briefly crossed paths with Diddy. He was close, deeply embedded during the most formative years of Diddy's rise. According to Jaguar and others who watched it unfold, Kirk was always there, always present, always nearby, in ways that raised eyebrows even back then. People noticed how often Diddy stayed at Kirk's place, sometimes weekly, despite having a girlfriend at home. At the time, no one questioned it too deeply. In the industry, strange behavior often gets brushed off as normal, especially when power is involved. Over the years, Kirk made comments that only made sense in hindsight, mentioning things like waking up together and praying. To some, that sounded spiritual. To others, it felt unsettling. There were even old workplace rumors that circulated quietly, stories people heard once and never repeated out loud. What makes Kirk's claim hit differently now is not just what he said, but when he said it. He didn't hint, he didn't imply, he directly stated that he had been forced into acts he never consented to. For people like Gene Deal, who had seen Diddy's darker side for decades, even this revelation was shocking. That alone says a lot. Kirk's words didn't come from speculation. They came from proximity, from lived experience, and from someone who had nothing to gain by waiting this long to speak, unless fear and control had kept him silent. Looking back, Jaguar points out that the warning signs were always there, scattered across conversations, offices, and whispered exchanges that never made it into public view. People noticed patterns but didn't connect them. They saw behavior that felt off, but the industry trained them to look the other way. Stories circulated quietly about what happened behind closed doors, yet no one wanted to be the one to say it publicly. When someone holds enough power, their actions get reframed as eccentric, misunderstood, or simply part of the culture. Jaguar emphasizes that this wasn't ignorance, it was avoidance. People didn't want to believe what their instincts were telling them because acknowledging it would mean risking careers, access, and safety. Even those who had seen violent or disturbing behavior before still found themselves stunned when Kirk finally confirmed what had long been rumored. The silence wasn't accidental. It was enforced through fear, loyalty, and the understanding that speaking up meant isolation. And once that silence became normalized, it allowed everything else to continue unchecked. What's unsettling is not just what allegedly happened, but how many people were aware of fragments of the truth without ever putting the full picture together out loud. One of the biggest questions raised after Kirk's revelation was simple: why now? Jaguar reminds people that timing is everything when power dynamics are involved. Kirk didn't speak earlier because the environment didn't allow it. Back then, speaking up wasn't just dangerous, it felt pointless. The industry protected its own, and the people at the center of it held too much influence. Jaguar recalls conversations from years ago where she made it clear she wouldn't speak on Kirk's story until he chose to speak himself. And now he has. The difference is the world has changed. Lawsuits have surfaced. Patterns have emerged. The illusion of untouchability has started to crack. Kirk's voice carries weight because he isn't telling a second-hand story. He's confirming behavior that spans over 3 decades, behavior people whispered about but never documented publicly. Jaguar stresses that this isn't about revenge or attention. It's about survival and truth finally having room to exist. When someone who saw everything from the inside finally speaks, it forces the public to confront how deeply rooted these issues really are. Jaguar doesn't deny that the documentary revealed uncomfortable moments, but she believes it still protected Diddy in subtle ways. One of the biggest examples is how it portrayed his early image. The documentary suggested a clean, disciplined lifestyle in his early career, implying no substance use and a controlled environment. But Jaguar points out how quickly that narrative falls apart when compared to old footage, interviews, and promotional appearances. Champagne bottles were everywhere. Industry parties were constant. Old audio even captures Diddy joking about being drunk and high within days. To Jaguar, this isn't about judging habits, it's about honesty. She believes the documentary rushed past how quickly Diddy was absorbed into the darker side of the industry and how that shift shaped him. By smoothing over those contradictions, the documentary avoids asking harder questions about accountability and transformation. It presents a sanitized version of events that doesn't fully explain how power and indulgence escalated so rapidly. One of Jaguar's most controversial points is her belief that Diddy may have been victimized long before fame entered the picture. She doesn't say this to excuse anything, but to explain how cycles of harm often begin. She describes a chaotic childhood environment filled with strangers, late nights, blurred boundaries, and adult behavior normalized around children. In her view, that kind of upbringing shapes how someone understands power, control, and relationships. When kids grow up watching exploitation presented as success and chaos presented as normal, it distorts their moral compass. Jaguar believes this environment helped create someone who later felt above the law, disconnected from consequences, and obsessed with control. She argues that ignoring childhood context doesn't protect victims. It prevents society from understanding how these patterns form and repeat. But regardless of origin, she makes one thing clear: trauma explains behavior. It does not excuse it. One of the strangest moments in the documentary comes when Diddy is seen filming federal agents as they approach his hotel. He isn't panicked, he isn't hiding, he's recording them back, speaking calmly, almost directing the moment. Jaguar interprets this as classic narcissism mixed with strategy. She believes Diddy planned to create his own documentary, positioning himself as the misunderstood figure at the center of a media storm. What disturbed her most wasn't the filming itself, but the conversations caught on camera. Discussions about public perception, messaging, and controlling how potential jurors might think before any formal charges existed raised serious concerns. Jaguar argues that this wasn't confidence, it was calculated. It showed someone who believed he could shape reality itself through media and influence. And that belief, she says, is far more dangerous than arrogance. Jaguar also draws attention to who was missing from the documentary. Major industry figures who were present during critical moments simply weren't named. To her, this wasn't accidental. It was strategic storytelling designed to isolate blame while protecting a wider network. She questions why certain relationships, conflicts, and alliances were glossed over, especially when they overlapped with major historical moments in hip-hop. By narrowing the focus, the documentary creates the illusion of accountability while avoiding deeper systemic exposure. Jaguar believes this pattern mirrors how powerful institutions have always operated, sacrificing one figure while preserving the structure that enabled them. Once you recognize that pattern, it becomes difficult to unsee. Despite everything, Jaguar believes this moment is different. The volume of voices, the consistency of allegations, and the insider confirmations have shifted the narrative. This isn't one accusation or one disgruntled former associate. It's a convergence of stories that align too closely to ignore. She believes the public is finally seeing what happens when money, power, and silence intersect for too long. Whether or not the full truth ever comes out, the damage is already done. The image has cracked. And once that happens, control becomes impossible. The question now isn't whether the industry knew, it's how long it chose not to care.